Hello everyone, Leaf Reed here, and we have one of my favorite pieces of literature of all time, the Divine Comedy. Now, very first off the bat, is this a very funny book? Why is it called comedy? Well, in the traditional, I believe, Greek style, there were just basically stories were called comedies or tragedies based on how it ended. If it was a happy ending, it was a comedy. If it was a sad ending, it was a tragedy. It's really that simple. You could have the most depressing story, and as long as it ended well, technically that's a comedy. And if you had a very happy story and it ended horribly, suddenly it'd be a tragedy. And of course, my own interpretation is really, you can look at things like Faust and whatever, and any story that ends in love, I think, really is I define as a comedy. And anything that ends in truth and some kind of punishment or knowledge is a tragedy, because it's something you didn't know. Anyway, I digress. Anyway, this is, again, another, staple, a cornerstone of Western literature. And very funnily enough, if you saw my previous video on the Aeneid, this is directly influenced / copied from that section of the Aeneid when it talks about the underworld. I can imagine Dante being a huge fan of Virgil, and he already says it because he's the main character in the very first opening. He says something, "Thou art the poet from which I have taken the beautiful form." So he's a total Virgil fanboy, he's very upfront about it, and he's very upfront about self-inserting him into this, epic poem. And similar to Virgil, he creates this amazing story for the Italian identity. You had so we've moved from the Greeks to the Romans and to the Italians, who I guess are still technically Romans, but they don't identify as such anymore. Anyway, also this is a beautiful, beautiful tome. I think this is a very popular one, or the most popular one. It has gold leafing or something in here, and a wonderful bookmark, and it's nice and red. And so, what is the Divine Comedy? It's the story of the author of the poet Dante, who essentially is called forth by Beatrice to go through hell, Inferno, Purgatorio, and heaven, Paradiso. So it's actually 3 books in one, and each one is about the different levels. And so Inferno is what everyone knows about. It's why everyone's interested in it, and it's kind of like the book about hell, basically. No one's really had written anything about it. And of course, from my understanding, the church did not like people writing about fantasy stuff that didn't associate with the Bible. If you're making art, it should be focused on the church and Christianity. And of course, the church is a bit controlling around this time. So the thing is, in Inferno, it is filled with pagan creatures and monsters and everything. But because it's in hell and the underworld, it's like, that's good. That's okay. You can put hell and pagan and Greek stuff in the underworld. It's like, oh, okay. Where do I begin? The whole 9 circles of hell, King Minos, the river Styx, the forest of suicide, all that good stuff is in here. And so the way it really begins, it's kind of interesting where, and this is such a, I don't know, I love this story, but Beatrice is such an important character, even though she appears very briefly. Her impact and her legacy, I think, are a lot more interesting, maybe more so, well, maybe not more than Dante, but almost as much as Dante. So Beatrice, and it's very emotional when you find out who Beatrice actually was. Beatrice in real life was Dante's kind of crush when he was 10 years old, and she was 10 years old, and he was kind of in love with her, but a very childish love, obviously. And a pre-pubescent love too, so that she was just this beautiful woman, or beautiful girl rather, and what tragically happened is that Beatrice contracted some disease and passed away, and she was only 15 or something, if I recall that correct. Dante himself, he had a very interesting career. I believe he was a soldier at one point, but he definitely was a scholar, a literary man. and at one point a politician, and there was this war of the white Guelphs and the black Guelphs that were fighting in Florence for the type of pope that was going to be elected. I don't have all the historical thing with it, but that's a brief overview. So Dante was not a one-trick guy. He did a lot of stuff, was a statesman, and eventually what happened is the Guelphs that he allied with, I can't remember if it was the white Guelphs or the black Guelphs, were eventually ousted from Florence, and he became like a political exile. And in his exile with his family is when he wrote this. So very interesting, you know. Doesn't matter if you get fired or your country gets destroyed or whatever, you can still make one of the greatest pieces of literature to ever grace the earth. Anyway, so that's the brief story. And so Beatrice in the book is, she is basically, her spirit is basically calling Dante because she can tell that he's distraught. And so she gives him this calling essentially. And it's something I've reread many times, because the whole call to action is from this woman that he adored, and I didn't really get it at first time around. I actually, when I watched the summary video, I'm like, oh wait, this is Beatrice calling him because she wants him to be enlightened or to feel safety and security and you know, the religious proclivity of peace of mind. And so it's very wholesome in a way, because Beatrice because it's someone that Dante was in love with even before he had, you know, you could say sexual feelings. And the fact that Beatrice herself is a spirit, really, she's not a flesh and blood person, that there's none of this, oh, I'm going to beat the bad guy and get the girl kind of mentality. It's like it's such a pure kind of love for this person, and I don't know, I think it's very moving and interesting. Anyway, so the book itself, so it starts off, and what Beatrice does is she doesn't talk to Dante directly, she beseeches Virgil on her behalf to guide Dante through the Inferno, because she knows that he can do it. Let me just actually do it. Oh yeah, there's a picture of Dante right there. Mean looking guy, and with his big nose and everything. Apparently this is pretty accurate, because what was somewhat unusual that they had been doing then is they did a death mask. So when you died, they would take like a plaster of your face, and so apparently that's how they kind of know what he looked like. And oh yeah, and everything in here, all the illustrations, these beautiful black and white sketches are done by a French artist, Gustave Doré, who did these, I think, in the 1800s, sometime around there. And he did a bunch of biblical, you know, etchings, but he really focused on the Inferno. Like, if you look at the drawings of these three books, they are all done by Gustave Doré. He is the quintessential guy who's like, I'm doing this. And ever since then, it's been, yeah, okay, here it is. So the opening canto, they're called cantos, whatever. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. So it's kind of like Dante's literally having a midlife crisis. You know, what do? I'm lost in the dark, I'm lost in the wilderness. And it's a story how he comes to love and enlightenment. But in order to do that, you have to go through hell first. And so this spirit of, you know, he's accosted by this lion and this leopard or something, which are like, you know, real animals, but kind of symbolic, because what are a lion and a leopard and a wolf doing in the wilderness of Italy? Anyway, and they kind of like attack him, and Virgil fends them off and whatever, says, oh, you're Virgil, I'm your biggest fan, and all this stuff. And so Virgil's like, okay, so yeah, that chick Beatrice, she wants you to come up to the Empyrean, if you could, you know, get a move on, that'd be cool. Anyway, so they team up, and they're like, all right, cool, let's go to hell. And so they the actual entrance to hell is like this random cave somewhere, and they somehow go through it, and there's a little thing over the archway that says, abandon all hope, ye who enter in, and, you know, all the good stuff. And you have, you know, Charon and the river Styx, and basically the whole outline in the Aeneid, but just in so much detail. Like, you can tell that when Dante read this passage in Virgil's Aeneid, he was just captivated so deeply by this underworld and this spiritual part, and wanted to tie it into the Christian ethos. That's just so cool to me. Anyway, so they get into hell, and it's this very cool thing, because again, hell is divided into 9 different circles. And so I actually made a post about outlining each circle, the sin and the punishment. And so the first circle, actually, I'll just briefly go over, is limbo. And so that's where Virgil's from, because he was, it's a very Catholic belief, I think, that if you are not baptized, you can't go to heaven. So there's a lot of, like pagans in there, and even though they're in limbo in the first circle of hell, it's really not that bad. It's just that they're stuck there, and you're basically in limbo, and you're just stuck there, and that's it. So it's really not that bad for the first circle of hell. It's like, okay, you weren't baptized, so you don't go to heaven because you weren't baptized by the church officially. And I was like, okay, whatever. And but yeah, it's not that bad, and that's where Virgil's from. But even though he's from there, he can guide Dante through almost the whole thing, except for Paradiso. Once he gets to Paradiso, Virgil has to turn back. He can't go to heaven. So interesting to know. Anyway, so they go deeper and deeper into the circles of hell, of Inferno. And basically, so you have the lust, where the spirits are blown by wind. And so they kind of go through each of these things. And what happens is, as they go through, Dante is describing poetically, okay, this is the sin, this is the punishment. And then he'll always mention, oh, there's some characters from history, or some characters from, the Iliad, or the ancient Greek history that are in here. Or he'll always have at least one guy he knows from his real life. They're like, Roberto Bonenzi, he was a really a stingy man. He's in the circle of avarice. So he'll have politicians and people that he's known through his political career and whatever, and he'll put them in these appropriate circles, or from myths and stories. Sometimes it's hard to discern exactly. I like this book. It's very poetic, but it is very hard to read and understand. Okay, is this a metaphor? Are you saying this for real? It's definitely difficult to really hash out exactly the real meaning of it sometimes, the literal meaning. Anyway, so they go through the circles, and so you have lust, and then gluttony, which is guarded by Cerberus, and they have infinite rain and mud on them. You have the circle of avarice, where these men who are greedy had to pull these giant weights and stones. You have the circle of wrath, which is a giant swamp where the ferryman has to take them over, and these guys in wrath are just fighting each other in this mud and this swamp forever. Wrath. Then you have the Hesararchs, I believe, who are the fake priests and whatever. So it was a combination of like this mythological area, but also social commentary on the time and whatever. And it's so interesting that this book came out right kind of 100 years roughly before the Renaissance, this kind of very Greek Roman inspired text, and so their punishment was to be burned alive in these tombs, basically infinitely. And once you reach the 7th circle, this is where Dante starts to cheat a little bit, where he's really like, oh shoot, I'm running out of space. I only have 9 circles. I planned 9 circles in my head, but he starts to kind of like, running out of space here. So the 7th circle, the circle of violence, is divided into 3 separate sections. There's violence against others, the normal one. There's violence against self, which is suicide, which in the Aeneid, Dido inhabits. And it's like the people actually, I think, become the trees, and the trees are bleeding. It's very creepy, very, I don't know. And then you have the 3rd circle, mini circle of violence, which is violence against God. And I've never been actually fully certain what that actually means. But what's interesting about this circle is, I think in the 1st circle, they're like, the violence against others, they're hunted by centaurs with bows and arrows and stuff. Sounds pretty bad. The circle against God is the most kind of iconic punishment. It's a barren, ashen wasteland, and these flakes of fire and ash fall on you forever. So it's the real proper version of what we think of as hell. There's a lot of places in hell in the upper areas where it's just wind or rain or very unpleasant things and just darkness generally. But there's not actually a lot of fire, it seems, actually, until we get to this area. And then after 7, Dante really goes into panic mode because you have the 8th circle, which is divided into 10 male bulgs. I have no idea how to pronounce that. I've been trying to pronounce it for male bulg, whatever. But it means like 8 mini circles or 10 mini circles inside the 8th circle, which is a variety of different weird things. So liars, simony, treason, more or less, different types of treason like blackmail, very particular things. And those are all different things. Theft, so, and the punishments are all like a pit of snakes, disease, a pit of tar that demons with stakes stick you back into. You have the Hesararchs, or the Mailbulg of Schism, which is that, people who split the church. And kind of funnily enough, the punishment for splitting religious communities is to literally be sliced in half forever by demons with giant, like, with broadswords and claymores, and have your entrails hang out, and pretty gruesome stuff. And there's even a depiction of Muhammad in there. So, ooh, yeah. So it's pretty intense. It's pretty intense Mailbulg as far as the Mailbulgs go. And of course, he's meeting all these people along the way, and Virgil is like kind of protecting Dante. Usually Dante doesn't seem to be in a lot of trouble, but he's like, oh, why are these people sad? What's going on over here? And there's only one part where it seems there's danger for like the sake of it, where they get to, oh yeah, this is really cool. So after the wrath, and they get to the Hesararchs or whatever, they actually get to a city. So most of this is like brimstone and stone and countryside, but they actually get to a city called the City of Dis. And this is a very cool concept where you actually have a city, a physical place where people inhabit in hell. And what happens is the demons are accosting them or something, and it's only because an angel comes down and intervenes and opens the gateway to the city that they're able to proceed. That's the only kind of danger that encounters there, and also at the end. So finally, they get to the 9th circle. And this is very interesting. The 9th circle of hell is betrayal. And guess what the punishment is? The punishment for betrayal is to be frozen. So there's that old expression, oh yeah, when hell freezes over. Well, it turns out in this version of hell, the very lowest level is a giant ice field. I know, I think that's pretty cool. So Dante and Virgil, they get to the very bottom in the ice field. And he looks down, and there's this giant, lake of ice they're walking over, and you see all the bodies kind of frozen, underneath, and some of their heads are poking out through the ice, talking to them barely. And it's funny because previously it had mentioned in a few of the other passages throughout hell, there are these rivers of boiling blood that have souls, trapped in them, trying to break out but can never do it. And you have this giant frozen lake at the bottom. And you have different types of betrayals. You have people who betray friends, family, certain famous families that had invited over other powerful families and assassinated them at dinner, and this kind of stuff. And finally, you have the final boss of hell, which is Satan and the devil. And it's very interesting how Dante depicts him here. Dante depicts him as having kind of 3 different faces, and each face, there's a red face, a yellow face, and a blue face. And they're endlessly chewing on the bodies of the greatest betrayers in history. One of them being Brutus. I forget the other guy, but the main guy that Satan is chewing on is Judas. And so they basically confront Satan, and I actually don't remember exactly what happens, but he's like, "Oh, why are you here? This is, not supposed to be here," or whatever. And so they have this little chase where they run under Satan, and Dante and Virgil run past him and past his legs. And then a very funny little thing happens where suddenly gravity reverses, and suddenly they start falling upwards. And suddenly they climb up out past Satan's legs, and they actually emerge from this cave. And they have now made it successfully through Inferno, and they are now in Purgatorio. And before them, across this river, is this giant mountain called Mount Purgatory. And so now it kind of resumes, and it's a lot. And so now we go through Purgatory. And so the only difference here in Purgatory is that there are people who are still being punished, but it's work, it's penance, that they did sin, but they didn't sin so badly that it was condemning of them, so they can work towards getting to heaven. And when you get to the top of the mountain, that's when you are absolved of all your sins, and you can go to heaven. So it's like, hey, so not bad, right? And so there's this very very cool scenes where they will refer to the souls here in both in Inferno as shades. And it's like they're people, but you can see through them, just like a ghost. And usually they're depicted by Gustav as wearing these hoods. And it says that they sometimes would be singing. And there's also angels in this area which kind of help guide the souls. And you have basically the 7 terraces of this mountain as the 7 deadly sins. So you have pride, lust, envy, a lot of repetitions actually of the previous one and similar stuff. So I think pride, they're carrying stones on their back. Envy's my favorite. Envy is so cool. For envy, their eyes are sewn shut with steel wire, or like metallic wire. That's so cool. For those who did divination and fortune telling, which was very taboo, apparently their heads are turned around and they can't walk straight. I think there was greed again. For greed, they have to lie down in penance. For gluttony, they're starving. For sloth, they are forced to run an infinite track around the mountain until they're let go. A lot more very direct and appropriate punishments. This is also interesting because this is where, the Aeneid only covered the underworld. So from Purgatorio to Paradiso, this is really all from Dante himself. And then I think for lust or something, it's something kind of lame. Like there's just, you have to walk through these hot coals and this fire. And before that, I believe is wrath. And what happens with wrath, there are this smoke, this infinite smoke that comes into your eyes and it stings your eyes. And you might think, oh, that's not such a bad punishment, because I read that. But recently I was at a bonfire and some smoke out of my eyes, and I was like, oh my God, it's not as bad as pepper spray, but it's what I imagine pepper spray would be like. So imagine doing that for a long time is not fun. So smoke in the eyes doesn't sound bad, but I would not want to do that. Anyway, and I think lust is actually the last terrace, funnily enough, in this process, and it's walking through these flames and these hot fires. And there's some very cool imagery. So in the same way that hell is very structured, this is very structured as well. You have 7 terraces, and what's interesting is that every time they pass through a gateway to the next terrace, very much like a video game, an angel will I think give Dante a key or make a mark on his forehead to prove that he's passed through this area. And so eventually by the end of these 7 marks. Oh, and I forgot, for flattery or something, the punishment is that they have to walk up the terrace they have to wear these orange robes that feel like they're made of lead, and they weigh them down. Really crazy creative stuff that you don't see incorporated in fiction anywhere, really. Anyway, so eventually Dante finally gets to the top of this mountain, and there's like the angel. I don't think it's Michael, but it's one of the archangels who's sitting on this throne made of fire. And he's like, oh, okay, Dante, yeah, good job, you made it, and you've got 7 keys or whatever. And so he basically unlocks this door to paradise, or to Paradiso. And however, the final like thing is you have to walk through this giant wall of flame. And I guess, he was walking over the hot coals to begin with to get here, but apparently this is a big deal. Like, you have to walk through this wall of flame, and it's a very symbolic kind of, okay, this is the final passage, the final thing. And basically it's like, okay, you have to walk through the fire. And it's like, oh yeah, the angel tells him, yeah, you won't be affected because you're pure of heart, you're pure of virtue, you pass through all the challenges, even though you didn't have to do them, you can go through fine. And so he has to finally do this final step and walk into paradise. And when he does this, he ends up, not in paradise yet, actually, he ends up in essentially, I believe, the Garden of Eden. The terrestrial paradise is what they actually call it. So in the garden, it's kind of like he has to say goodbye to Virgil. They have to split ways because Virgil is not allowed into paradise. So Virgil has to basically leave, and Dante continues. And this is still in Purgatorio. So Dante is in this garden, basically, and he sees Beatrice. And the way they describe Beatrice is that she wears this silken green gown, and she's, kind of this almost pseudo-angelic-like figure. He kind of looks at her, and she looks at him, and they kind of have this funny moment of like, do I know you? And but anyway, yeah, they have this this moment, and you realize, oh, this is Beatrice. You called me here for, redeem my soul, basically. And she says, yeah, no, let me show you the heights of paradise. And so, oh, and I forgot, the way that it actually ends is when he walks through the fire, what actually happens is there are these eagles there that actually carry him up to the top, the very top of the mountain, which is where this paradise is. So you can't just walk through the flames. You have to actually have the eagles, bring you there. So it's like 2-factor authentication or something. And so anyway, what I think happens then is Dante has to swim or douse himself in the Leith River. And I think once he does that, he's like totally purified and clean. And they have some other conversations with some characters, but finally Dante with Beatrice ascend into paradise, and thus begins the final book, Paradiso. Now, in this book, there are essentially 10 circles of heaven, and each circle, while heaven is kind of like good everywhere, they do tend to divide by the circles simply by the types of virtues that people exhibited when they went to heaven. So the actual treatment of the individuals does not differ, but the reason for them being there is different. And so the way it depicts these heavenly spheres is very interesting. Is that each, and that's the interesting thing too, is that it's almost as if, you have to realize in the olden days, people didn't really know about space. So they, at least the way Dante describes it, is like each atmosphere above the earth leads to the next planet. And so the first one is the sphere of the moon, the sphere of broken vows. So people made vows, they tried to keep them, but they were eventually broken. Not by, by happenstance or, whatever. So these, poor souls are kind of in the first sphere. And the way the heaven is depicted and described is like this magical cosmos, this kind of space and this cosmic backdrop where the angels are singing and everyone's wearing, robes and everything is doused in golden light and all that good stuff. And yeah, this part isn't very as spicy or interesting as the Inferno, but it is, very beautiful. It talks about how some angels form these giant, shapes, like they form a giant cross made out of angels. They have different spheres where the angels circle around them, and they all and the angels all kind of sing together in this giant, I don't know what you call it, this giant circle of singing and harmony. And so you go through the spheres of Luna, Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Each one is basically revolves around righteousness, martyrdom, compassion, mercy, all the sort of virtues. And so what's really interesting actually about this book is finally when it's getting to the end, and they're passing through space and all of the cosmic bodies. And finally they get to this part where they kind of come to like, they're approaching basically the center of the universe, and Dante meets Saint Peter and the apostles, basically. Well, actually, no, he meets the church fathers, actually, initially. Saint Augustus and all the sort of famous saints. And as he's going through this, more and more love and marvels and just things fills his heart. But it's eventually that he and Beatrice finally make it to the edge or the center of the universe, which is the cosmic rose. And it's this amazing drawing by Gustave Doré, which you can instantly recognize it once you see it, and you will never forget it. Because what the cosmic rose is that this center of the universe is like this, well, like this rose with petals, but in the petals are these thrones of all the, the great patriarchs of the Old Testament. And you get further into the 12 disciples, and at the very, very center is, of course, God and Jesus Christ and the throne and the Trinity all together in the center of this cosmic rose. And Dante just feels this overwhelming love just overtake his whole spirit and revitalize him entirely. And the way it ends is it says that Dante finally sees, that the underlying law of the universe that makes the planets turn and the sky, change weather, and the birds and the animals that live, that the underlying essence of everything that puts the stars in motion is love. And it is the supernal, the highest love that is the love of creation. And that is basically how it ends. Dante goes to heaven and ascends, and that's it. And so that's the conclusion of the the epic poem. And so this story has influenced so many other pieces of media, spin-offs, and I assume other books. So this is again another cornerstone of Western civilization. The very interesting thing is that after reading this, I was looking for a film adaptation, and there isn't really a lot of film adaptations of this book, probably because it's so hard to do. The only major one I saw was like a 1910 Italian-funded film, black and white, of the Inferno, and they skip over a lot of stuff, obviously, but it's the only most accurate attempt I've ever seen someone try of this novel. And I find it's very interesting. Like, Dante is considered, such an iconic character in the world of literature that you just say his name. You don't have to add Alighieri, and you know who you're talking about. Very, very impressive piece of literature. There's some very beautiful passages in here, some very poetic, things. And it's just the most fascinating mythological Christian text that you could possibly read besides Paradise Lost. Like, this is, an epic poem, but in the Christian mythos. I just think this is so cool. The other thing obviously it inspired was the Dante's Inferno video game by Electronic Arts. And it's okay. I mean, it's a God of War clone, but it's not bad, I guess. But, it is what it is. What's funny about the video game, I will add, is they actually added the entire translation of this book and like the options menu, which I just think is the coolest thing. I love seeing that. At least, okay, you're making like a God of War ripoff based on, Christian mythology, and it makes sense because God of War is about, pagan mythology, so you might as well. But I just love to see that they actually added the original text all on video games. If you want to totally nerd out and actually read it, there's someone probably out there who knows the entire Divine Comedy just through the video game alone, I wonder, who read the entire thing just from the game. But anyway, definitely one of the classic pieces of Western literature. I'd recommend it. It is a very long book. It's a very thick book. It took me a few years on and off to read it, and really even longer to really appreciate it. But it is a fascinating book. Definitely difficult to read. Not you definitely need to like kind of have your wits about you. But if you're in the wits for some dramatic poetry, it's not bad. The one thing I find about reading this is sometimes Dante will go into, like, he'll talk about the thing, the noun, and the verb will come after. It's like, oh, we walked through the torrents and the caverns that echoed with wails most doleful or most lamentatious. So he'll describe the thing and then attribute the adjective to it after. That's the only like common thing I saw, but just, amazing artwork, amazing story, and it's ultimately about the spirit of Beatrice wanting Dante to eventually love himself, I guess, and experience the enlightenment of the Empyrean, and the Empyrean, by the way, is the highest point in heaven, and I don't know, it's just a classic Christian story, and I feel like a lot of this, even the ending is somewhat similar to the ending of Faust when he has this sort of redemption. But yeah, I don't know. It's a pretty good book. It's nice. And yeah, anyway, I don't know what else to say. It's a classic book. And yeah, as always, keep reading.